this because I want everyone to imagine that I'm giving Nigel some feedback right now. And the problem is this. Nigel, in meetings, is a bit of a bulldozer. Yes, that's the face of a bulldozer you're looking at, everyone, right? So in other words, Nigel's the type of guy who he loves the sound of his own voice, right? He comes in with his own agenda, doesn't listen to anyone else. So that's the premise we're going to do this from. And I'm going to walk you through three steps for delivering suggestions in an effective way when doing feedback. So step number one is you have to highlight the problem. You have to highlight the problem. You have to highlight what is wrong. But more importantly, you have to explain why it is a problem for the reasons I talked about earlier. When people know why what they're doing is wrong, they're less likely to do it going forward. So going back to our scenario with Nigel, this is how I would perhaps go about doing that. I would say, Nigel, moving on to some ways you could improve going forward. One thing I am noticing is that in meetings, you are the loudest voice. Now, although it's fantastic that you're confident to share your ideas, and you often do have great ideas, my friend, what does happen is other people in the meeting feel less inclined to speak up. They feel a little bit intimidated. And what that means for us overall is that we're not hearing everyone's ideas. And when we don't hear everyone's ideas, sometimes we don't select the best one for the team going forward. So what I've done there is I've spoke about what the problem is. I've actually given an example of the problem as well in meetings, Nigel being loud. But I've also talked about how it's not beneficial for the team collectively because we're not getting the ideas forward. That's the why behind it. Very important whenever you're talking about the problem that you explain the why. Moving on to step number two, this is where you bring in the answer, right? The solution to the problem. So what are you going to do to fix the problem? What is the path forward? And what's really important when you're talking about the answer is that you give examples. You give examples. Why do you think we want to give examples, Nigel? Can you remember? What do examples do?
Give more gravitas to what you're trying to say, make it more relatable to the person so they understand. I've just got one thing going around in my mind, actually, Kyle, while you're doing this. In the format you're saying, would you do this in a group situation or on a one-to-one basis?
This is probably one-to-one with us right now. Yes. We're in my office, Nigel. We're in my office. Yeah. But it depends on the scenario, right? It depends on the scenario and what you're discussing and so forth. But let's just say this is just the two of us right now. But the reason we want to give an example is because, again, creates clarity. Gives you a clear idea of what you need to do going forward. So going back to our hypothetical situation, what I could then say is, but I think the answer for this issue is quite simple, Nigel. I think what would work best is if you wouldn't mind speaking last in our meetings. That way, everyone around the table can share their ideas freely, and then we can end with your idea. So that way, we're all collectively sharing and we're finding the best solution as a group going forward. So the example is clear because I'm telling Nigel, if you could do this, and I've given them the visual in a meeting, if you can speak last, it should be clear for Nigel what I'm suggesting going forward. I hope everyone can get that, see that point there. It's very important that you give examples, that I don't just say to Nigel, could you be a little bit quieter in meetings? Could you let others speak? No, I tell him how he can do that. The how is so critical. It really is. But this last step is even more critical in many ways. And the last step is check. I need to check with Nigel to see what he thinks about all of this, right? Because if Nigel disagrees with me, if Nigel has resistance, and I don't know about that, he just walks out of my meeting or my office in this hypothetical scenario, then it could mean that nothing will change going forward. Because Nigel will walk away and think, that Kyle guy, he's a bit of a jerk, isn't he? And he'll continue on his way doing what he wants to do. So it's very important that you check with the person how they feel about what you've said. And you can simply do that by asking, what do you think about that, Nigel? How does that sound to you? And then Nigel can tell me whether he disagrees, whether he has a different point of view, or whether he does agree. Now, if he disagrees, well, we can talk it out, right? I can hear his side of the story. Maybe Nigel has a valid point and I'm wrong. Maybe, maybe not. But we can find a solution by talking it through. And then on the other side, if he agrees, great. Now we've made an agreement. We've done a virtual shake of hands, Nigel. We can try and keep you accountable. We can both be accountable to each other in that next meeting, right? So that you are speaking last, for instance. So those are the 3 steps. And thank you so much, Nigel, for coming up here. I think it was just good for some people to have a visual when I was describing that. You're definitely not a bulldozer. You're the friendliest man I know. But yeah, thank you so much for that.
Well, just before you leave that, Carl, I did want to say closure. The bit you had on the end there, the 3rd point, is so important, because very often I've been in meetings where just the first 2 bits have been done or variations of them, and you leave not really knowing where you are. So I think that's a really great tip. So thanks for sharing.
No problem at all. Just to recap for everyone, step 1 is the problem, right? Talk about the problem, explain the why behind it. Step number 2 is the answer. What is the solution going forward? And give a clear example of the answer. And then step number 3, check. Have an open-ended question to see how the person feels about it.